This show is sponsored by you. Stick around till later to learn more about that. This is Cup of Go for Friday, July 26, 2024. Stay up to date with the happenings in the Go community in about 15 minutes per week. A little bit longer this time because we actually have an interview again.
Woohoo!
I'm Jonathan Hall.
And I'm Shai Ahmad. Everybody's been talking about the interactive release notes. We just have to get into it. We just have to get into it and start clicking on them, right?
Pull out your interactive podcast player and interact along with us.
No, so we're going to try to make it an interactive media experience somehow and sort of communicate to you what's the experience of using this blog post, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even on the channel, Chris was like, this would be such a loss if this guy ever stops writing these for Go releases one day. Yes, I totally agree. But what are these release notes? So Go 1 to 3 came out. We talked about it at length. Now it's in the phase of like a release candidate, another release candidate, another release candidate, right? It's coming soon. It hasn't been like fully released yet. It has a lot of things, right? Iterators. There's new things with timers, their garbage collection. We talked about all these things a lot, like in previous episodes. But if you want to try them out, like I don't know about you, Jonathan, but let's say you open a blog post, right? You talked about how you use the demystified iterators blog post last week, right?
Yep.
As a developer, what happens when you open a tech blog post?
I scroll to the code and then I copy it into my editor and run it.
So yeah, this interactive release note page uses a project maintained by the same person, by Anton, called Kodapi, where you can just run the thing on the web and see the results, and you can edit it as well, like interactively, and play around with it. So the entire feedback loop is a lot shorter, which is great. Works really well, and you can just look at all the different features like range, iteration, all the iterator types. And it's also well written. It's not just like, oh, there are examples, so it's nice. It's also very well written. Like the explanation about pull iterators versus push iterators is the first time I understood the push versus pull iterators.
Yeah. You know what? My new favorite feature about this whole thing, and maybe this was already there we talked about this interactive release notes for 1.22 6 months ago. Maybe this feature already existed. I didn't notice, but he has links to the proposals for each of these and the CLs where they were implemented. So if you really want to nerd out and go like, oh, how is this implemented? The links are right there. You don't have to go do your own homework. You can just click to the CL and see how it was done, or click to the proposal and see what the intention was behind this new feature. I think that's pretty cool.
The best explanation for me, I think, is the HTTP cookies one. Just shows the problem with parse cookie, and then shows parse set cookie, and just shows exactly how it works, and you can run it, and it's super, super easy to understand, which is great. And cookie named and whatever, because that's the exact kind of thing where you don't need to read any documentation. You just need the examples, and it's the best way to learn. So really good work, Anton. We basically, if you're planning to upgrade to 1 to 3, take 15 minutes and just run through this. Maybe 30 minutes. The iterators are a bit confusing. And run through this blog post. And by the way, if you're hosting like a similar thing to ours in your Go meetups, right? Oh, what's new in Go in your cities, in Atlantis, Go, Go GopherCon. This could be a real good basis for just a talk, right? Let's just read Anton's blog together and send him a selfie saying, thank you, dude. It's a great resource. Because it really is. It really is. Like I plan doing that at my company with the Golang guild.
Mm-hmm.
So really cool. The link, obviously, is in the show notes. So if you didn't know, you can open your podcast player, whatever it is. There's a little thing called the show notes where it says maybe summary or show notes or description. All the links of all the stuff we're talking about are there. People have told me they didn't want to open our webpage every time, cupago.dev, and scroll to the relevant episode, whatever. You can just do it in your podcast player. I tested it in Spotify and it works there. So I don't know.
Awesome.
So release notes 1 to 3 is coming soon.
Yes.
What are some new things that aren't in 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Shai. What do you need to do after the show is over?
Write the show notes
and
argue with you about who's writing the show notes.
Is that the only thing you need to do after we finish the show?
I finish uploading.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can only do one thing after the show's over.
What do you mean?
Yeah, that's how Set Finalizer works. You can only set one. So if you need to set 2, what do you do? Well,
define a function.
Set Finalizer is a pain in the rear. Anybody who's who's read about it probably has decided not to use it because it's so confusing.
What is runtime set finalizer?
Yeah, it doesn't guarantee to be run.
Huh?
First off, let's back up a little bit. What is it? Right? So you can use runtime.setFinalizer to set a function that will run when a particular thing, object or whatever, is garbage collected. There's no guarantee that a thing will be garbage collected because maybe your program will exit before the garbage collector runs, or maybe you're not using much memory, so there's no reason for the garbage collector to run even for a long-running program. And you can only set one, as we discussed. There's a number of limitations with the set finalizer thing. And I remember when I was learning Go, I read through this. I'm like, man, this is so confusing. I'm going to make sure I never ever have to use that thing. Mm-hmm. There's a new proposal out to deprecate that.
Is it like a destructor in the sense that when I don't need the object anymore, it's going to get called, or does it have to wait until the garbage collection?
It waits till the garbage collector. So it's kind of like a destructor, except that it doesn't run when the thing goes out of scope. It runs when the garbage collector runs. And therefore, it's not guaranteed to run. So you can't really use it to like close file handles and stuff like that.
I just imagine I'd use defer, right? Because
defer is a better solution.
That does what I would have used set finalizer for. Instead of setting a finalizer on an object, I would just defer the close or the cleanup or whatever.
And I think that's kind of the reason there's not another way to do it, because defer should handle the majority of those cases. But there are still cases where set finalizer is useful. I don't know what they are, but they exist. But anyway, there's a new proposal to deprecate it and replace it with something called add cleanup.
Deprecate it? It's part of the runtime.
Yeah, so it would still be there. Go one compatibility promise. It would still be there. It would just be like, don't use this anymore.
Oh, like not delete it. Just like mark it as deprecated. Please use the other thing.
Right. And the other thing takes advantage of generics, which of course did not exist when set finalizer was invented, and it allows you to add more than one cleanup function, which is really cool. So you can not only argue about show notes, but you can also take your kids swimming or whatever you have to do after the show's over. You don't have to just be stuck on one. So it's an interesting proposal. It's gotten a positive reaction so far. 14 thumbs ups, 2 rockets, and a couple, a pair of eyes, whatever those votes mean. That's surely going to win.
I think eyes are like, I'm abstaining.
Yeah.
I'm voting this right now, so you can change. Breaking news, it's now 15. It looks good, but I really hope to never use it, right? I never use set finalizer, and I've been programming in Go for a while now. Maybe just because I'm usually doing like backend stuff and not super low level stuff in Go.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not writing like compilers or profilers or things, deep serializers or things like that. I don't know. Overall, it's nice. It's a nice design.
Yeah, I like it.
The struct is just called cleanup, and the function is just called stop, which cancels the cleanup function. And the cleanup and you have add cleanup. You're just adding a cleanup function. Like, that seems pretty nice. It's also a usage of 2 generics, which the moment I see that, I'm like, do you really need it? You have like, how in generics you have T, whatever.
Yeah,
now it's T and S.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, maybe I'll never use it because it's complicated. But it's actually not that complicated.
I'll probably never use it, but I'll definitely be more likely to use this than set finalizer.
All right. So if you need to clean up stuff like us after the show, after our kids, you can upvote, add cleanup. I think actually what would be the hardest part, if this ever goes to production, which, I'm not sure. It's a big thing to deprecate something in the runtime, especially if it's not super used and you have defer. But if it does, writing the tests for this proposal should be like a masterclass in quality assurance. All the race conditions, all the data races, all the edge cases, how do you make sure that it works with different optimizations and with future garbage collection versions and with different garbage collection algorithms? Are like, oh, whoa, very complicated in my opinion.
Who's going to be clicking that CL link in the Go 1.24 interactive release notes now?
124? Not before,
or 128 or whatever this is. Anyway, so this proposal was from Michael Kniezek. I think he's on the Go team. He works at Google anyway. He had another proposal this week also, which I think I'm much more likely to actually use. It's a little bit of a corner case, but he has a proposal to add a new package to provide weak pointers. You know what weak pointers are?
They haven't gone to the gym in a while?
Pretty much, yeah. It's like when you're trying to solve a crime and you're like, this is kind of a clue. Like, well, at least the guy ran that way. We don't know which of those 6,000 people in that crowd he was, but we see footprints running towards the crowd. So it's a weak pointer, right? Not really. So a weak pointer is basically a pointer. We know what pointers are. A memory address that says the thing is actually over there. The thing is that the thing it points to could be garbage collected at any time.
Ooh. How do I use weak pointers in Go today?
Right now, I don't really know how you do that in Go today. I don't know if you can. I think it's a language feature. Maybe there's a way to make that happen. I suppose with some unsafe magic, you could probably make it work.
I can imagine like reading the pointer value, out to bytes and then, using it someplace else, like unsafe, whatever.
Yeah.
But why, like, it's hard for a reason. I don't want to point to potentially garbage collected memory because then I'll get a nil dereference, no?
Right.
So
right.
Why are they useful?
They're useful in a number of situations. The first one that pops to my mind is if you want some sort of cache for something that's relatively easy to recalculate. So like if it hasn't been garbage collected, we might as well use the pre-calculated version. If it has been, that's fine too. We'll go ahead and recalculate it or refetch the thing or whatever. Mm-hmm. So if you want some sort of like lazy caching, where if it's still there, I want to use the thing. Otherwise, I don't. So it could be useful for that. And the proposal talks about a few other use cases, but that's the one that jumps out to me and resonated most with me.
Okay. I think we talked about something related here, in the proposal in the past. We talked about the unique package, right? Mm-hmm. Being added. And that sort of really conflicts, right? If you remember, the unique package was all about reusing the same strings, right? Mm-hmm. With two different pointers. So making it into a unique pointer into the same string to like save on memory. And if you turn one of these pointers into a weak pointer, now the other one is going to get invalidated. And in general, I think the abstraction of the garbage collector is if I'm still using a thing, don't touch it. Mm-hmm. Weak pointers sort of make that promise fuzzier, I think.
Definitely, yeah. It's no longer a promise. It's like, I might be using this, but clean it up if you want to. Mm-hmm. Like when you tell your wife, like I'm not done with the model rocket on the kitchen table, but if you need to clean the table for dinner, that's okay.
You can launch it. I'm wondering, like, again, similar to the previous proposal, which makes sense because it's by the same person. What's the context of this being added, right? Like, yeah. I just can't imagine myself worrying about weak pointers or worrying about runtime cleanup set finalizers, thing like that. But I have to assume there's like some context of Michael here, work thinking about, I need to do something and therefore I need a weak pointer. So I'm wondering what's it all about.
Maybe we should get him on the show and he can answer this for us.
Hey, Michael, we have a channel on Slack. It's called cup-o-go on your Gopher Slack. So come talk to us if you want to come on the show. Cool. Two awesome proposals from Michael this week.
Yeah. So we talked about weak proposals, and your first thought was that we say don't go to the gym. So if you do go to the gym, it probably makes you buff, right? Cue cheesy joke music now.
All right. Buff. Yes, that was the segue. Now I will start talking about buff. So I have an opinion. I think buff should be the de facto way of working with protobuf right now. In the same way that you should only use rough for Python linting, and poetry for package management in Python, and Golang CI-lint as your linter. And I have a few opinions on, okay, for now, right now, this is the best in class tooling for this tech stack, right? Okay. I am certain that buff is that for protobuf. If you remember, we talked about a blog post called gRPC, the good parts. Right?
Yeah.
This is cup-o-go for June 28th, 2024. gRPC is sort of a high-performance RPC, remote process call framework, which uses protobuf under the hood. This blog post is about why gRPC is bad, like the bad part.
So Buff has been building sort of an ecosystem around protobuf, right? The main thing I love about their thing is the CLI. When I say the main thing I love about them, I immediately realize it sounds like a sponsorship. It's not. They don't know I do this. I'm just a happy user. And their CLI is open source, and it does all the things you'd want a CLI to do, right? It's opinionated, comes with linting, comes with the breaking changes, etc., etc. And they've been trying to build a business around it with their own protobuf schema registry, where you can store your protobufs and share them and do the building on the cloud, so you don't have to install all the proto generators, which is always a huge pain. And then you have to containerize it, blah, 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 publish it. So they're taking care of that, which I think it's a good idea, but I haven't used. Like I'm not a paying user of the schema registry. I'm just using the open source CLI. And they've released, actually a couple of weeks ago, but we sort of slept on it, a buff stream, which is an interesting concept. So let me tell you the concept and you tell me what you think, right? When you hear it. They are introducing buff stream, which is a drop-in replacement for Apache Kafka, right? Which is a huge, like millions of companies use. And they're claiming it's 10x less expensive to operate and has protobuf first data governance. It's 10x less expensive because it's using object storage instead of like a DB in the backend.
Okay.
So it's just saving stuff to S3, AWS S3 buckets. And when you pair it with protobuf, it basically validates data for the topics when you publish a message into the topic. It makes sure it's protobuf compatible, right? And you save the descriptor on the like entry point to that topic, so it like can serialize, deserialize, validate, all this stuff really, really fast. Basically, send pre-compiled versions of your protobuf schemas to the topics, and they're planning to add field level access control as well. So, you could have like, only if this message contains in the field, the word admin, then you can publish to that topic, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not there yet.
All right.
How does that sound?
So I've never used Kafka heavily. I've had it on a couple projects. I've never done much with it. But it sounds good. I like protobuf. I like saving money. I think I have questions about like performance with regard to S3. That doesn't sound like a high performance sort of thing, but I'm sure they have a reason that works just fine. So yeah, it sounds really good.
So what they're basically saying is you can get rid of networking between zones, and you can get rid of expensive disks, and it doesn't necessarily increase the latency as much as you'd expect. They say that the P99 latency is 500 milliseconds, and the median legacy is 260 milliseconds. So if you do an analytics workload where it's not like real time, you should be fine, right?
Yeah.
So here's one opinion, right? This is a really good step forward for buff. And if you're already a full-on like buff shop, you're already using the schema registry, this might be a no-brainer, right? You probably already developed this for yourself. However, if you're not, it's like there's a lot of Kafka with S3 solutions out there. This is not super innovative. And the niche of the like schema and like enforcement in protobuf already enforces itself. Like if you run deserialize in your application, or you try to serialize it before publishing it to the topic, and the message isn't adherent to the schema, it's just not going to work, right? So, not like if your application knows what it's publishing towards, it should be okay. So enforcing schemas at the producer level might be a bit stupid because you can already do it with protobuf and with protobuf validate. Like you already have to do it in your application level because otherwise you can't read the data. And it's kind of immature. They began designing a year ago. They don't have like, we use this at Disney. It's not like proven at scale or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
And you don't have the community behind it, right? Like Apache. It's a huge community. Tons of people use it, which support it. And because it's not Kafka, it's a replacement. A lot of features that Kafka has and best practices guides, whatever, extensions, et cetera, Kafka Connect, I don't know. They won't like work, right? So I'm not sure. And with the main thing being protobuf, if you're not a protobuf shop already, this is not the thing that's going to convert you. And the price, it's better, but nothing when you compare to self-managed. I don't know. I really want to love it because I love their stuff, and I would love being a developer that's working in a full buff shop.
Okay.
But it's very hard to justify for me this product. So I don't know. It's very interesting. I like it a lot. They have a Slack channel. They have a demo. Like you can contact them to join the beta. This is very early, but I found it very interesting in a topic that's probably relevant to a lot of people who listen, right? People who do all this data intensive application shit.
Let us know on this Slack channel, go on the Gopher Slack. If you've used it, if you would use it, if you wouldn't use it, why not? We'd love to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, but just to circle back to the beginning, if you do protobuf and you have your own script instead of setting up buff, you need to set up buff already, man. It's really good. Really, really, really good.
Sounds
All
like
right.
someone needs to do some sort of user research, maybe do some sort of survey about usage of tools like this. I wonder if we could get somebody on the show who would talk about that sort of stuff. Oh wait, I just forgot. I just interviewed Alice Merrick from the Go team who does that for Go.
Nice. So let's just do a super quick lightning round and get back to that.
Yeah. So stick around, Shai, for to listen to the interview you missed.
I missed it. I had an emergency. I'm sorry. All right, lightning round time.
Let's go.
Lightning round. First up, Noam Yadgar released a really great intro practical guide called Profiling in Go, a practical guide. If you've been meaning to get into profiling, you've heard us talk about it, and you don't know exactly how to do it, just open that blog post, read it from top to bottom, and you should be super good.
Next up, we have, wait for it. Oh, here it is. It's finally loaded. Cogent Core. Today, we're announcing the initial public release of Cogent Core GUI framework. Cogent Core allows you to build powerful, fast, arguable, elegant apps that run on all platforms in a single Go code base. So it's a GUI framework for Go to write apps that, at least in my case, took about 60 seconds to load in my browser. So that wasn't cool. I don't know if 60 seconds is an exaggeration, but it took a while. It was long enough. I definitely would have clicked away if Shai hadn't told me to look at the link.
So if you're one of the fine people on the audience, go check out your new competitor. And finally,
Cage fight.
What?
Cage fight.
Like box fight, but both fighters can't fight each other because they can't figure out how to centralize themselves. And GUI developers. All right, let's stop into lightning round. Unit 42 released a new cyber research about a new variant of a Golang-based ransom hubs ransomware. So, yay, more Go development.
Woohoo!
I think after the latest CrowdStrike incident, which we haven't talked about because it doesn't have anything to do with Go, but it is
Right.
probably the biggest thing that happened in tech this week. I'm less worried about new ransomwares popping out, the new security updates for the tools that have to fix them.
Yeah.
But they're using cool stuff in Go, especially Gofuscate, which is interesting to try to hide their thing. But Unit 42 caught them. Good stuff, Palo Alto Network, who are a competitor of mine, but I'm still appreciative of your security research. You have samples available on VirusToll. Link is in the show notes. Boom.
We're done. Lightning round over.
All right. We wanted to thank our Patreon supporters for supporting this show. If you want to support the show as well, all our links to Patreon store, where you can buy swag, Slack channel, previous episodes, etc., can be found at cupogo.dev. Please share this show and rate it and do anything you can to help boost our listenership. And now on to the interview.
I am excited today to be joined by Alice Merrick from the Go team. Shai, unfortunately, couldn't make it today. I don't know what came up, but I'm sure it was important, but not nearly as important as the conversation we're about to have. Alice, welcome to the show.
All right, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. You learned about our show at GopherCon, I understand.
That's right. I was in Chicago at GopherCon, and I was talking to a couple of attendees. Also, shout out for Robert Burke, who first mentioned Cup of Go to me. And
Right.
so I went looking through some episodes to help me get started. I like to listen to the Go community. That's my job. And so I kind of want to know what people are talking about. What are you excited about? And I found one podcast that was all about the community, and I was like, oh, great. This will be a great intro. And it turns out you were all talking about the Go Developer Survey, which I happen to have run this, a few months ago. So
Nice.
I was super, super just excited to get feedback on that from the community. Most of the time when I'm sharing that survey, I'm sharing it internally. And so I get some good feedback from the Go team. When I share it externally, then it kind of goes into the blog post out into the void. And, occasionally people will start, talking a little bit about it on Reddit or so. But really, this was one of the first times I got to hear some really great feedback on what you found interesting and, what you were confused or why was this in here or how the Go survey has changed. And I was just, oh man, I would just, that was just great to hear.
That's nice. I think that was the episode where we talked with Bill Kennedy. Is that right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So even getting some feedback from him too on what he found interesting was great.
Cool. So I want to talk to you about the Go Developer Survey, but first, I'm curious how you got introduced to Go, to the Go team. What's your history like there? How did that get started?
Okay, so I've been at Google for, I don't know, I guess a little over 6 years now, and I used to work on other kinds of developer tools, mostly in cloud. And so I worked on some stuff that was internal to Google, so like our internal developer tools, and some stuff that was more cloud related. I worked on probably most relevant is I actually worked on Garrett for a little bit. And that is the code review tool that the Go team actually uses. And I had never, at this point in my life, had never heard of Go until I was doing some research on, what do people find difficult about getting started with Garrett? Why is this so hard? This was something that the Garrett team was interested in. We think it's hard for people to get started. Can you tell us why? And so I went down this path, like why people use GitHub or Garrett or GitLab or some of these other tools, Bitbucket. And I found a proposal from the Go community that was called "Just Use GitHub." And I don't know if you remember this. This had a lot of comments, and it gave me so much to work with, to really help me get familiar with what people liked or disliked about Garrett, what people liked or disliked about GitHub, and kind of what it meant to the community, not just the people who maintain projects, but like the people who are contributing and things like that. And so eventually I didn't have the opportunity to just move on to the Go team, but I did get reorganized at one point. And I had a choice of a couple different language teams to join. And one of them was Go. And I wanted to stay in open source. So that's where I went. Yeah.
Are you going to tell us the other languages that lost out to Go, or is that a secret?
It's not a secret. In fact, like some of those teams aren't currently staffed. But there was a Java team, there was I think a Python team, and there might have been something else. And so I decided to go and get started on the Go team, and I loved it. I love the team. I love the community. I love being in open source. As a UX person, it's I guess a little unusual to be working on open source stuff. Though if you are a UX person or you know one, don't ever discourage them from getting involved in open source.
Nice.
Yeah, it's I mean, really, just as a model, it's a great model of how a team really cares about feedback from the community, which you don't always get in any other kinds of products or services or whatever you're delivering. Like the open source ecosystem and the relationship between people, people at Go at Google and the people who use Go outside of Google. Like it's just a really neat relationship and a really cool place to be.
Cool. And so how long ago was that you joined the Go team then?
I want to say about 5 years at this point. Yeah.
Cool.
So I've been around for a little bit. It was just before the pandemic. So there was actually a period of time when I hadn't met anyone else from the Go team other than the other researcher who sat in Seattle. And the rest of the team was distributed in other places. And so I think it was about 3 years before I met some of, a lot of people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to ask a question. This isn't really Go specific, but I think it'll be a good question for you. Maybe it is quite relevant because as Go developers, our audience are going to be very back-end heavy type, focused. And I think the idea of UX to most back-end developers is something like a React developer who's designing web interfaces. That doesn't sound at all like what you're doing. And I've worked with some pretty professional UX people who would laugh at that description, but I think that's the common perception. Would you help us understand what is UX and how does UX relate to something that doesn't have a front-end interface?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually got that a little bit from people at GopherCon as well. It's like, well, what do you do though? And I'm like, well, have you ever taken the Go Developer Survey? And then I'm like, well, that's part of what I do. I would say that's the most visible part of what I do, but it's not the only part of what I do. And absolutely everything that you interact with, a hammer has a user interface. It doesn't necessarily need to have a front end. It doesn't necessarily need to be visual. Some interfaces are natural language interfaces. If you're talking to your digital assistant, you might be using natural language, or an LLM, you might be using gestures. If you're talking to your lamp or something, there's just all kinds of things that have all kinds of interfaces. and even developer tools and developer languages and things that you're using on a day-to-day basis also have an interface, even if you don't typically think about it. Somebody designed that, this keyboard you're using. Somebody designed that. This mouse, someone designed that. But also just like what your key bindings are for your your whatever editor you're using. Somebody made decisions about that. And maybe a UX specialist was involved and maybe not. Sometimes developers kind of come up with these things organically and things can spread in other ways. But, if you use VS Code, you better believe there's probably an army of UX people, behind that kind of thing. So, and a language itself also is going to have, or an API. APIs are designed, right? And languages are designed. So anything that is at that intersection of human and some kind of technology is going to have an interface and some kind of user experience associated with that. So I don't strictly work on graphical user interfaces. I'm interested in the experience of using tools, for humans and other kinds of technologies.
Sure. Wonderful. I think this is my last question before we talk about the survey. And I don't know, the answer may be no, maybe it's too nebulous, but is there something you can point to that we would know that you have, like your fingers are so deeply ingrained into that we could go, oh yeah, Alice is responsible or largely responsible for this thing? Other than the survey, like a feature survey of something in the Go ecosystem that we could point to.
Something in the Go ecosystem that you can point to. Probably fuzzing.
Okay.
So if you've used fuzzing, that was something that I worked on quite a bit ago, and some of the documentation around that and helping inform some of the use cases there. And then also, I don't want to take all the credit for this because again, I'm part of a 2-person team here. Yeah. So I know security, like Go Vault Check. In particular, that UX had their hands on that. So and that's just a couple examples. Sometimes people will respond to my research in ways that I haven't even kept track of. So, sure. I'm sure that the Go team could probably even point to more examples that I'm necessarily not even thinking about.
Well, I love those examples because I just think it helps make it tangible that what you're doing. Because like Go Voluncheck, I don't think it has any graphical interface component. Right. Maybe there is one somewhere, but okay, you did that. I can imagine the kind of work that you're doing, so that helps make it more tangible. So let's talk about the survey.
Yeah.
Hopefully every listener has taken the survey. We always encourage our listeners to do that. I'm sure they haven't all done it, but my first question for you is, at a high level, what are you hoping to learn from the survey?
All right. Yeah, that's a big one. There's so many things. And I usually, when I start out, I have a list of things like these are my goals for this edition of the survey. The survey is not open right now, but we are actually about to start another round.
You do it every 6 months, right?
About that. Yeah. We've started doing it twice a year. We used to just do it once.
Okay.
And so some of the things that I want to learn every time we have some sort of top level metrics that we keep track of year over year, are those steady? Have we seen any big shift? That's one thing. That's, things I can pass up the food chain to be like, yeah, we're doing all right. Kind of a gut check. Then there are other things that we collect every year that are like how people are using Go to see are there any changes there in how people are using Go, what they're doing with Go, what kinds of other tools they might be using along with Go, different preferences for other, IDE, things like that. What are they developing on? And this informs one, sometimes how we interpret changes that we see over year, right? So if we see that these things are stable, then we can say our population is about the same. We should expect, these results to be, we would expect changes to be attributed to things that we did rather than changes in our population, right? Okay, so we do collect some of those, even things like how much experience do you have with Go, or what size organization, things like that. That kind of helps us monitor those more metadata kind of things. And then I usually have a couple of topics that I'm interested in. And one of my chief goals is always to help the Go team prioritize what kinds of things they're going to be working on in the next 6 months or the next year, right? So finding out what's really important and critical to people. So you might see lots of questions on the survey that are like this, that deal with like, hey, how important is this to you? Do you do this or this thing or this thing? And that's because it's going to help the team, determine, okay, this is where I should focus, because a list of issues is a great place to start, but it doesn't really help you know how much of an impact am I going to have if I take on this work, right? So helping the team determine what to prioritize and what kind of impact they can expect to have by doing certain kinds of work. That's like kind of like, if I can do that, I nailed it. And then I usually have like a couple of other topics that maybe they might be related to other ongoing research that Todd and I are doing. They might be related to maybe even other like things of interest in other developer ecosystems. Like this last year, AI has just kind of been in the zeitgeist. So we did ask a lot of AI related questions. Sometimes these are questions that are related to other people that we partner with, like DevRel, or maybe people who do other kinds of things in the community. Like, are there certain kinds of questions we can help them answer, and that kind of thing. So I usually have like a lot of things that I'm trying to do. I try to limit to, okay, here are my like top 3 or 4 goals or whatever.
Yeah. What has been maybe your biggest surprise over the years as you're doing developer survey? Have you ever gotten any answers that were like, wow, I really did not expect that?
Well, I will say that, I've been asked this before, and every nothing is surprising in retrospect. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It's so I often will have to kind of write out ahead of time, what do we expect to find here to determine whether or not something is surprising or not. And I will say that just in this past year, something that surprised me, how different things like operating system preference are globally. And so we tend to get lots of respondents who are from North America, Western Europe, basically people who are very comfortable responding to a survey in English, because at the moment that's the only language it's available in. And so some of our data, it reflects that population very well. But it might not be as reflective of Go developers in other parts of the world, right? And so that was something that we discovered. I wouldn't necessarily say we discovered it this year, but it became a little bit more obvious to us this year when we introduced a new source of sampling for the survey, and that was through the JetBrains collaboration. So over the 2-week or so period that the survey was open, about 10% of people who use GoLand were asked, like, hey, you're using Go, like, would you like to participate in the Go developer survey? So this was like, about as close to a random sample as we can sort of expect. And we did get to hear from people in other parts of the world than we normally get to hear from. And so we had a little bit more to be able to say, like, hey, it looks like people in these parts of the world might have a greater preference for just developing on Windows than we see here. And it kind of helped us actually understand some of our website data, right? Which seemed like, hey, it seems like we have a lot of Windows users. Where are they? And it's like, okay, this is why. Like, we're just not hearing from them in this source, but we can hear from them from some other source. So that was, I would say, just on this last iteration, that was surprising to me. There have probably been other surprises that, over time you just get inured to.
Of course. But I like that answer, because it leads me right into like the thing that always jumps out at me, being this eternal skeptic that I am. When I look at the results of the survey, the number one highlight is developer sentiment remains high, with 93% of respondents expressing satisfaction with Go. But the people who hate Go aren't going to respond to a survey. So how do you account for that?
Well, you'd be surprised. I mean,
Okay.
have you been on Amazon? Have you seen, read the reviews there? No, sometimes I do actually get, this is a fair criticism. And we have asked people who say they are dissatisfied why. This is something that we've done on past surveys. We don't do this every year because the answers don't tend to change a whole lot.
Sure.
But it usually has to do with, there's something I need that Go doesn't do. Either it's some kind of language feature, or it's some library that exists in, some other language ecosystem that Go is just not, nobody's ever really invested in using Go for that. Yeah. So that tends to be the thing that I hear. the most. I've also done research where I talked to people who tried to adopt Go and did not.
Okay. Yeah.
So I definitely go out of my way to talk to those people because I know they're not going to necessarily be as common on my server.
Right.
So I have to make a point to talk to people who are unhappy with Go.
Sure.
Actually, once I met one at GopherCon who coming up to me very proudly telling me all the things they had to hate about Go and why it's so awful.
Curious why they bought a ticket, but hey, whatever.
Apparently, they said it was the best tool for their job at the time.
Okay.
But it was fun for me. But anyway, back to so we have a couple of different sample populations. One way that we advertise the survey is through the Go blog. If you read the Go blog, you probably really like Go.
Yeah.
This is true. Now, if you're just using Go as a part of your day-to-day job, you're maybe not you don't follow the ecosystem that closely. You're not reading the Go blog. You're just I'm punching the clock. I'm doing my job and I'm going home. Maybe you would have heard about the survey through your IDE plugin, VS Code, or maybe you're a Goland user. And, it was hey, I noticed you're using Go. Do you want to tell us about it? So that's more of a random sample. Of course, somebody has to elect to be yeah, okay, I'll do it. But sometimes people you do expect more extreme answers, right? From people who are sort of electing to participate, right? You would expect to see more people who are unhappy, more people who are happy. And when we do comparisons between people who come from the blog and people who come from these other sources, there's statistically not any difference in how we have measured customer or CSAT or customer satisfaction. And this gives us some confidence in that number. And we also see this is also a way for us to track things over time, right? So we can make comparisons year to year. If this dropped dramatically, that would be at least that would be a terrifying signal. And so that either something had dramatically shifted in our population or something had dramatically shifted in how we're doing. It's important for us to have metrics like that are just kind of I'm taking your temperature. This isn't a diagnostic tool, right? We have to ask other kinds of questions for that. But this is a way to take a temperature. And this kind of question, it's called a CSAT. I actually had a laugh out loud moment when I was listening to you talk about NPS and CSAT. These kinds of things, they make it easy to make comparisons with yourself year over year. And CSAT is also something that's used, I think, by every product at Google. So it helps us compare with other people who are like us, maybe other kinds of developer products or tools and things like that. So it can help us hey, look, the Go team's doing something right over there. Their CSAT's very high. How are the rest of you doing? So it helps to make comparisons, even if it's not the most it can be in some ways hey, we did good, pat on the back. And I think some of that is still also important. Hey, we know we're still doing a good enough job.
The second highlight from this last survey says that a majority of respondents, 80%, said they trust the Go team. Obviously, you're going to have your own bias here because you're on the Go team. But one criticism we hear, especially in corners of the internet like Reddit, where people are just habitually negative, is Google is railroading things through. They already have decided they're going to do, let's say, telemetry. That was one sort of hot button issue where this complaint came up. We know that they've already decided to do it. It doesn't matter. It's just a show to make it look like community support. How do you respond to this? I mean, obviously 80% of people apparently don't think that this is a problem. Probably more than 80% don't think it's a problem. But there are a certain vocal minority who sort of rag on this. How do you respond to that as somebody whose job it is to learn from the community?
Yeah. So this was an experimental question this year. We had never asked this before. It was something that in the developer space at Google, people are starting to be interested in measuring developer trust, not just on the Go team, but in we've got Android, we've got Chrome, we've got Flutter, we have all these, and so this is something that's of interest to see what is this like? And what does this mean? And how do we measure this? And so this was an experimental question. And honestly, we didn't have any way to really interpret what this meant. when
Okay.
we collected this. So I did
Yeah.
a follow-up study
All right. Nice.
to actually learn, when we ask people, how much do you trust the Go team at Google to do what's right for developers like me or something like
Yeah.
that, or make, and we wanted to know, like, when we say this sentence, what does trust mean to you? What does the Go team at Google mean to you? And so how are you kind of interpreting this question, and why did you give it the response that you gave it? And it seems that, like, kind of what this means is like super multifaceted. There's like there's lots of literature on just like trust and how to measure trust, and some of it mapped pretty well with what we found, and some of it was like a little bit different, just because sometimes people ask about, like, how much do you trust an organization, or how much do you trust this particular technology? But the way that we asked it was kind of like, how much do you trust the Go team at Google? Is a little bit kind of in both camps. Is it a technology? Is it an organization? What's going on here? And so, what some of the things that we found is there does seem to be this belief that the Go team cares about and has the capacity, or the competence to be able to make good decisions for Go.
Okay.
And that we take into consideration the people who use Go when we are making those decisions. And so it's kind of like some competency, some benevolence, there's, and then also just belief that Go will improve over time. So I will say that seemed to be the things that's the way that I'm interpreting, what they're telling me when they say, like, yeah, I somewhat or very much trust the Go team at Google. Now, this is something that we're probably going to continue measuring over time, and we're probably going to ask even more more granular questions in the future to really understand about, like, what are the components that go into this trust and things like that. So I will say that this is the beginning of this metric. It is not the end of this metric.
Yeah. I think I don't remember how I answered that question. I may have talked about it on the previous episode. I don't recall, but I recall that, like, when I look at the summary, the thing that jumps out at me is for developers like themselves. Like, how many developers are actually like me? Like, maybe I implicitly trust the Google team or the Go team to make all the objectively correct decisions, but I'm in such this weird niche corner that, like, none of those decisions apply to me because I'm unique in of course all my weird esoteric ways. So that's one of the thoughts that jumps through my head, and I'm sure you had all sorts of responses that picked on different aspects of that.
Yeah. So I mean, another thing that we can do in the future is ask, why do you why do you trust Go this much, or why do you not trust Go this much? And I learned just to learn more. But yeah, I think you did talk about it on the episode where you mentioned I think you specifically mentioned telemetry and the decision to make it opt-in rather than opt-out.
The last several items in this highlights, or several of the items, were about AI. I'm not going to go into the specifics there because there's just so much there, but I'm curious. Obviously, AI was a big part of the last survey. What did you learn in broad strokes about AI in the Go community that was relevant to you?
Yeah, so my colleague was doing some other research related to AI, and so I think parts of these were more things that were, he's trying to triangulate some data with, interviews he's doing with, things that we're finding on the survey. So some of that was just sort of like triangulate, like, can we put a quantitative measure on, other things that we're learning. So one of the things that we wanted to know was, are people trying to use Go in like similar or different ways than how they're using Python? And like, where is Go fitting in this AI space? And how are people potentially going to use Go in the future here? And it doesn't sound like people are like, yeah, I really need, whatever Python libraries. I'm thinking, all I can think about is matplotlib because it's the only thing I use. But other things like whatever ML or AI related libraries. Is that something we need to build? Do we need to build interoperability with Python? Like, what do we need to do here so that we're sort of meeting people where they're at? And so that was one thing that we took a look at. It sounds like people who are doing AI ML, which is like not everybody, right? So lots of people that we talk to are not in the space, and that that seemed right to me. Maybe some people who are working on the back end of an application, maybe these are not the AI ML people. Like, it's not like we surveyed a bunch of data scientists. So the fact that not everybody is doing this, okay, that's not super surprising. And the fact that the people who are doing this are not necessarily using Go. Also, not like again, like not too surprising. There weren't a lot of surprises here, but we also didn't know.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is we
You
also didn't know.
Hunches, and now you're more confident.
Yeah, and surveys are good for that kind of thing, is sort of testing a hypothesis. They're not necessarily the best at generating every possibility of response.
Sure.
Yeah.
What should we be looking forward to in the next survey? Can you give us any sort of hints, or does that violate the validity of the results if we know ahead of time?
Well, I'm really happy to tell you that it's not written yet. Okay. And so I might have to turn this back on you and ask you. I need to ask you, what do you want to hear more of? Because I'm actually in this process right now of like collecting, feedback and questions and stuff that's going to go on the next survey. And so I'm curious. I don't always get to address, the community directly, and what do they want to hear more about? What's interesting to them, and what's going to help them make decisions for the next 6 months or year.
So that reminds me of something I just saw. I have to look it up here. Oh, they were curious how many applications, like the split of application deployments by operating system. Mm-hmm. And they looked at the survey and they found and it says I primarily deploy Go software too with Linux, Windows, and so on. But I noticed that this is about how many people deploy to those places, not how many applications are deployed on those operating systems. Mm-hmm. So like, to be silly extreme, if all of the Windows developers are working on one app who responded to the survey, that would be a point of 1. And if every Linux developer is working on a set individual app, of course, there'd be millions, or in this case, 5,000 and 500 Linux apps and one Windows app, but the numbers look different because they're talking about developer numbers. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know how you could possibly solve that with this sort of survey, but
you can't. Yeah, from what we asked, we just asked like, which platforms are you deploying to, and they can select as many as they do. Yeah, and maybe they only had one application on.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah,
it's
but
not even
then
a
they
one-to-one
had 10.
relationship.
Yeah. And that's not represented here. And so my question is that distinction really important? And like, what would that help you? What kind of decision would that help you make?
It would help me win an internet debate. That's really all that matters to me. I don't actually know what I think it was a point of curiosity for the person who made the observation. And I was just pointing out that these aren't exactly the same thing. You're not making quite the same. The data you're presenting, this person on LinkedIn, the data he's presenting doesn't quite make the claim he's claiming it does, but it's a close one. So I was just being my normal eternal skeptic. It wouldn't matter to me, that particular thing. So I don't think that's going to help you in the least. Just the first thing that jumped to mind.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Well, I mean, this is a good demonstration of why I sometimes say no to questions on the Go developer survey, as well as like sort of in this process, I have to have a valid reason to collect data. Like, just as my duty as a data steward is that I can only collect things that we're going to use and that's going to help us in some way. Curiosity, it's pretty low priority, like unless it's gonna help us move forward, which is, I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking things out of curiosity. Lots of academics do that.
Of course.
But that's not my duty to the Go community and the Go team.
So one thing that I would find very fascinating as a host of a podcast that tries to help promote Go is what libraries are missing that would make Go adoption easier. And we bring on a lot of guests to talk about data science and AI ML stuff in Go because we feel like that's an area where Go is growing. Kind of like you were just talking about Go versus Python. I would love to see Go really compete with Python in that area. I think it's a better language for that. Type safety, and it's faster, all these things. But there's a strong sentiment not to. And I think from the survey you've seen that a lot of the reason is it's missing libraries. So, that would be one area, but I'm not exclusively interested in that, but just in general, like, where could could I, as a co-host of a podcast and as an open source contributor, where could I spend my time to help fill in the gaps? We don't need another ORM. We have enough of those. We don't need another web framework. Where could I spend my time with interviews and with contributions to open source code that would help promote Go?
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things here that I want to tease apart. And one is the idea that more libraries will increase Go adoption, which my research does not indicate that this is necessarily true. I don't think that that's true. But I could talk about that, but I want to address the missing libraries thing because I have asked this before.
Yep.
As I specifically said, what if anything would let you use Go more? And I have this. I asked this question as an open text question for several years, and then we moved to a format where we provided the responses based on those previous things, and one of them was missing libraries. Or other things that were missing in the ecosystem. And then if they selected that response, I then said, okay, tell me what's missing. What's the thing that's blocking you? And for some people, it was GUIs. They want to, they're like, oh, I want to build GUIs. And for some people, it was AI/ML. And again, I asked this sort of like, I think the last time I asked this was like 20 or 21. So, things have changed, since then. But that's where that's where people kind of wanted to see more, more libraries or more support. But the things that they were building were because I also asked in another survey is like, okay, if you're using Go for GUIs or if you're using Go for, AI/ML, what are you doing? Why do you use Go for this? And some of them were just kind of like, oh, well, I wanted to learn. It was fun. It was a side project. And so for those kinds of things, it was like, well, it was hard to make a business justification for us to go and build those kinds of things, but there's definitely interest there. Definitely if you're looking for what are just people just interested in doing, GUIs and AI/ML are kind of the top things that we we've been told that are missing. And there are some good reasons, even, there might even be business cases now for doing some of these things and Go. When I ask people, why do they use Go for GUIs or why do they want to? One of the responses is very much similar to why people write CLIs in Go, which is one of the most common use cases for Go. And it's well, it, deploys anywhere, it's just so easy. And it just so happens that my end users prefer a GUI than a CLI. So it seems like it's kind of for, sort of similar things. I'm building this little utility or something. It just so happens that my end users don't like CLIs. They want a GUI. So, and I'm like, hey, that's that's pretty good. And I know that there are some things that exist in the ecosystem that will help people do that. I don't know how well supported or maintained or whatever. I don't know if this is meeting people's needs. It's not a thing that I have specifically looked into. But I do know that it's, it is a thing that people are interested in. And maybe it's just so that they can, they have a starter project and it's fun. And I think that that's also a good, that's a good, important use case. It's just not necessarily one that the Go team is going to go out and build.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I think you joined the Cup of Go channel. I don't know if you're hanging out there regularly now, but we can reach out to you there.
Yeah.
My final question, the question we ask all our guests: when you first started learning Go or were introduced to Go, what was your biggest surprise?
So we talked about this a little earlier in that I don't write Go regularly, but something that is different about Go that I found surprising is just from what I know about, things like Java and, and other languages is they have frameworks and they have, lots of ways of doing things. And in Go, there seemed to be kind of, it was a little bit more, I don't want to say bare bones because that makes it sound negative, but there is, it seems very easy for people to read and understand each other's code in ways that you can, when I looked at Go, I could see this language was really meant for kind of big software projects with lots of people working together on them. Like it was really trying to solve the problems of software development as a social activity. Even like GoFump, like it's formatted the same. We don't have to fight about it. And little details like that, as well as the sort of lack of these like big frameworks, made it something that was really easy to share like with other people. And so I would say that for me was like the I would say the biggest surprise. And that, but it's kind of, I realize that's kind of high level, not like, but I don't use it. Yeah. But yeah, that was, and also just like how much people love it. I haven't always worked on things that people love. So that was
as a UX enthusiast, I'm sure that's a relief.
Yeah. I mean, that really feels good.
Yeah. Good. Great. Well, Alice, I really appreciate you coming on. It's good. I think you're the first present member of the Go team to come on the show. We've had some past members.
Exciting.
I think you're the first one who's a current member of the Go team on the show. So if I'm wrong, I apologize to whoever I forgot, but I'm pretty sure you're the first.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I hope this starts a new trend for you if you're interested in talking to Go team members. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks for sharing your wisdom. Maybe we'll have you on again soon. And until next time.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.